Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday. Welcome to church. It's so good to see everyone. There's a Michigan fan in the second row, which just makes me so happy. Thank you. I know you guys won the championship this year, but we have too. And today I walked into my office and there was a puzzle, a Michigan puzzle on my desk, and I have no idea who gave it to me, or I didn't. And so I put it on my Instagram and I said, "Wow, like I'm being blessed today." And then I saw someone, his name is Scott, in the hallway, and he said, we've been in a 2-week series on spiritual warfare, and there was something in his house that he needed to get rid of. And it was that. So, anyways, happy Sunday. There was one thing this past Christmas, a category of gifts that dominated my 10-year-old daughter's Christmas list. Unfortunately, gone are the days of like baby dolls and Barbie dream houses. We've now entered what I consider the somewhat like boring phase of gift giving. Okay, she's into clothes and shoes. And this was the other thing she was into this year, skincare. Okay. Now, if you're a mom of a tween girl, you most likely feel my pain. She could not wait counting down the days till I would let her stroll through the aisles of Ulta and Sephora to garner ideas of these bright, aesthetically pleasing little package bottles promising glowing skin and smooth complexions and the perfect beach scent of a Sol de Janeiro perfume. Now, not only did she ask for these products, but she also asked for a vanity complete with a charging station, a light up mirror. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little jealous. I walk by her room in the morning and I see this setup. I mean, she's charging her phone, she's talking on the phone, she's curling her hair, she's got all her little drawers and such. And it's a whole thing. Now, before you start pointing blame at me and you go, well, no wonder she acts like that. Look at you. This has to be you. And you assume maybe I walk around my house with some vitamin C mask plastered to my face every waking moment. That's her father, okay? Just kidding. He would kill me. He never does that. I think this trend surpasses me, okay? Because the skincare industry, it is booming. Not only have they found a welcome market in a 10-year-old girl, but also in the category of products that we all have become so accustomed to that we don't even bat an eye when we hear the phrase that is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is right here, anti-aging. You buy them, you know what I'm talking about. Anti. I don't know if I'd ever slowed down long enough to look at this phrase. And when I have right now, I've decided that I'm offended by it, even though I do have some anti-aging products. Anti, that word, right? It means opposing, against, contrary. Why can't it be called the Age Well cream or the Aging Gracefully serum? Have you ever thought of that? Instead, it's anti-aging as if it's some death sentence to do something that no matter how many serums or creams we rub on our face, we're aging. And I hate to say it, but there's not a whole lot that's going to stop it. I saw this quote recently that sums up how our culture and society kind of view aging. It says that aging is a fact of life, but looking your age is not. Oh, aging's gonna happen, but don't you dare look like you're aging. That would be insane. This is the world we live in, okay, people? Now, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. Why all the age talk? As John mentioned, we're in a series called In My Prime. And last week, he kicked off and shared about the danger that exists when we find ourselves constantly seeking a different phase or a different stage of our life. Whether it's that we look behind at what was, or we look forward at what's to come. And when we do this, what can tragically happen is that we end up missing the unique season that God has for us right now that is actually precious and profound. I think we can all agree, right, that there's so much at stake if we're constantly anti-aging our life away, if we're constantly wishing away the stage we're in. And I also think there's kind of a mixed bag of reasons for why we do this. For the first one, I'd say that many of us get swept up into the not new but tried and true trap of comparison. We look around, right, at what others are doing, what stage they're in, and we believe the lie that who we are and how we look and what we're doing is some tragic mistake, and what someone else or something else says matters is what matters more than what God has right in front of us. Maybe it's an unmet expectation. We just expected our life to be different. We expected by now to be ... fill in the blank. And so we struggle with the disparity between our expectation or the expectation of others and our actual reality. Maybe it's a bit more simple as we've aged. Life just hasn't gone the way we thought it would. Circumstances have happened that we would have never imagined. And the idealistic picture we maybe had of our life, it just isn't actually what has panned out. Whatever it might be, what these cause us to do, as John articulated, is to miss the beauty and purpose in our current stage. And I want to add to this today because I want to unpack something else that I think these cause us to do. Oftentimes, I think they cause us to make a move, to make a big decision that we regret later, to take control, and maybe even to try like a quick fix, to attempt to change our circumstances or expectations. And I don't know about you, but I've tried this a time or two, and it typically doesn't turn out all that well. And so today, I want us to consider a way to flourish into our stage and to live into what God has for us. And then also at the same time, to fight this temptation of making a move, of taking control, trying to change our circumstances overnight. And it could be summed up in a phrase that you're going to hear me say a few times. And I'm not going to lie, it doesn't really sound all that fun, not a whole lot of curb appeal, but it's this right here. It's that we would choose and we would learn to stay put. To stay put. I know you're probably thinking, that's all you got for us today, Carmen. It is, unfortunately. So what exactly do I mean when I stay put? When I say that phrase, I want you to think of these three words. I mean that we would learn to accept. We would learn to accept our season, accept whatever might be right in front of us, despite how difficult or despite how incredible it is, despite how close it is to our expectation or how far from our expectation. The second thing I mean is that we would learn to surrender, that we would develop this ability not just to accept our reality or our stage, but to say, okay, God, well, if this is what you have for me, then I'm going to lean into whatever it is. And then finally, when I stay put, I mean that we would learn to be faithful. Being faithful is to live a life that is marked by trust and obedience to God. It's to take all that we are and then all that we also long for and to submit to what God has for us and say, okay, God, well, I'm going to trust what you say and where you lead me. Oliver Wendell Holmes said this about faith. He said that the greatest act of faith is when man decides that he is not God. I believe that we have this beautiful opportunity to be in our prime, no matter what our stage or age is. If we learn what it means and what it looks like to stay put or to stay faithful. I am so moved right now by faithfulness. I'm on one, you could say, about faithfulness. Just slow, quiet, head down, gritty faithfulness. Nothing glamorous, nothing flashy, just another small step or another faithful choice. Because what I believe happens when we as the people of God choose to stay put and be faithful is so incredible. And the reason I think it's incredible is because I have proof and so do you. The Bible is full of story after story of people who are ordinary people, just like you and I. Yet their stories are recorded and their names are written down, not because of some heroic act they did. Not because of some divine interaction, although those stories are in there, but because they just decided to stay put. They accepted their reality and they surrendered to what was dealt to them, no matter how much they liked it. And it wasn't always easy. In fact, it typically isn't easy. It takes something going on deep inside of us for us to stay put when life doesn't look that great. But man, over there, it looks pretty good. Or when we think, if I just do that one move, if I just do that one quick fix. But I believe it is in faithfulness where God meets us and where we experience the freedom that he has to offer. I think it's necessary to also make this disclaimer. I'm not suggesting that you stay put in a situation that is dominated by harm or abuse or some type of manipulation, or in a situation that doesn't sit right with your moral compass. There are many situations that require us to move and to move in a big way, And those are not necessarily what I am referring to today. Eugene Peterson, who is the author who translated the scriptures into the Message translation, he wrote these words. He said that to follow Jesus implies that we enter into a way of life that is given character and shape and direction by the one who calls us. To follow Jesus means picking up rhythms and ways of doing things that are often unsaid, but always derivative from Jesus, formed by the influence of Jesus. To follow Jesus means that we can't separate what Jesus is saying from what Jesus is doing and the way that he is doing it. To follow Jesus is as much, look at these next words, or maybe even more about feet as it is about ears and eyes. We say that our direction determines our destination. A lot of following God is figuring out where he's leading us. It's about our feet. And so today, to live into the life stage that God has for us, I want us to consider what it means to dig our heels in, to stay put, especially in the seasons of life when it's really easy not to. We're going to look at the life of someone who stayed put in the scriptures, and that is Joseph. I love the story of Joseph. Takes up a decent chunk of the book of Genesis 37 through 50. And I want to encourage you this week to go read those chapters. And I've been so moved by just rereading the life of Joseph and understanding the depth of faithfulness that he had, but then what became of that faithfulness. Joseph, he had some wild stuff happen to him. I mean, he went through crazy seasons, yet he remained faithful. And so today I want to look at 3 areas of his life that I believe we find ourselves in too a lot of times. And often when we find ourselves in these 3 areas, it's when we want to make some type of move. But Joseph, he just stayed put and he stayed faithful to God. And I believe we can too. And so these 3 areas are the pit and the prison and the palace. You're welcome that they're 3 P's, all right? Now, if you've been around church, you may have heard of Joseph. Joseph, the guy with the multi-technicolor coat, right? It's not all that accurate. That's okay. But Joseph was one of 12 sons of Jacob. They say you aren't supposed to have a favorite kid. But no, just kidding. We don't have favorite kids, right? I don't normally have a favorite. It's not the little vanity one, that's for sure. I'm kidding. She is lovely. But Jacob did have a favorite, okay? And it was very obvious that Joseph was his favorite son. The problem is that all the other brothers knew this, that he was their father's favorite. And so therefore, they hated Joseph. And to make matters even worse, the story picks up when Joseph is 17 years old. He's just a teenager. And he has these 2 dreams that he decides to share with his brothers. We sometimes think it's fun to tell our dream stories, right? You wake up in the morning, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to tell you this crazy dream. I don't know, you might rethink it after you hear what happened to Joseph. 37, 6 through 11, here we go. He describes his dreams. He says to his brothers, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And what does it say? They hated him all the more because of this dream and what he had said. Now, if one dream wasn't enough, Joseph decides to carry on and he explains yet another dream where the sun and moon and 11 stars bow down to him. So you can see how this might have not gone over too well with Joseph's brother. Joseph already is the favorite child. He's now giving his brothers this vision of someday being in charge, reigning and ruling over them. And not only just them, but also that his father and mother would bow down to him. And so because of this, they devise a plan to get rid of Joseph. And so at first they were going to kill him and throw him into a pit. And then they say, no, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him into the pit alive. And then the 3rd time's a charm. The final idea wins out. And it's right here. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, why don't we just sell him to the Ishmaelites, not lay our hands on him? After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. And so when the Midianite merchants came by, his brother pulled Joseph up out of the cistern or the pit and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. They think, well, we might as well get a little something out of this. 20 shekels of silver sounds about right. I want to pause for a moment because I think we read stories sometimes in the Bible like they're fables or something. We're like numb to what is actually going on. But I want to slow down and really think about the gravity of what is happening to Joseph. His brothers sold him. They stripped him of his family ties, his dignity, his freedom, his future, and they sold him into slavery. That amount, 20 shekels, is about what you would pay for a teenage slave. Imagine for a moment just really how brutal this is. I mean, the deep despair and loneliness Joseph must have felt, how disowned, how humiliated he was. I wonder in this room, have you ever had a pit moment in your life? Maybe not literally. Maybe you've been hurt by someone so badly, though, someone who you loved, who betrayed you, someone who went against you or who abandoned you. Maybe you feel like right now you're in a pit season. You're stuck in a terrible job. You just received a terrible diagnosis. Your marriage is failing. Your family, something's going on. You feel disappointment. You feel like you just can't seem to catch a break. We don't know a lot about this moment for Joseph. He gets sold, and then he gets sold again to Potiphar. Potiphar was a high up. He was one of the officials of Pharaoh, who was the Egyptian king at the time. But we do know that he stayed put. And we get to see this kind of glimpse into the character of Joseph. We get a little insight into what was going on deep within him because of what is written in Genesis 39. It says this, that now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And look what this says. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. There was something about Joseph that despite how broken he was and how humiliated and how alone, that God was with him, and it was noticeable and it was palpable. Joseph was in a pit, but there's no possible way he was in a pit alone. He was with God, and God was with him. And this had to be a moment where Joseph's faith is being tested, and it's pretty clear that Joseph didn't let this pit that he was in ruin him. Instead, it was forming him. Our pit moments, they're so often when we want to make a big move, but I wonder what it might look for us to stay put and to stay faithful to God in these moments. And for others to look at us and say, man, I don't know what they're going through, but one thing is so true, it's that God is with them. And man, I don't know how she's getting through that season right now, but it is evident that God is working in her life. The reality about our pit moments is that they're the darkest moments typically. Despair, trial, whatever it is, but so often in them, if we stay put, God has so much to offer us because God works in and through our darkest moments. You ever look back at your pit moment and go, I'm so thankful that God did that? Because he was with me. It was terrible, but God was with me. I've somehow, by the grace of God, kept a fiddle leaf tree alive for now years. She is thriving. I've named her. You're supposed to name her and talk to him. I don't talk to her, but I'm shocked she's alive. And I know very little about why and how she's alive, but I do know that there's something happening in the darkness of the dirt, in the roots, that's magical. And I can't see it, but I can see the fruit of the pit. And in the pit, God so often uses those times to deepen and to strengthen our roots and someday to bring fruit. But we have to stay put and stay faithful in our pit in order to see the fruit. Eugene Peterson, he said this, that the hard work of sowing seed in what looks like perfectly empty earth has, as every farmer knows, a time of harvest. It'll come. But all suffering, all pain, all emptiness, all disappointment is seed Sow it in God, and he will finally bring a crop of joy from it. I love that imagery. Whenever we sow our suffering, our pain in God, a harvest can come, but we have to stay put. We have to choose trust and obedience long enough to see it and to be formed by it. Joseph, he goes from a pit to a prison. Unfortunately for him, his story doesn't get easier before it gets better. He had come to this place, right? We read of having great influence. Potiphar had left everything in Joseph's care. And the text adds something about Joseph that always just makes me laugh a little bit. It says that Joseph was well built and handsome. Okay, so Joseph, he was easy on the eyes, all right? Now, the scriptures, we don't even need Netflix. You just read what happens, okay? Because what happens is this didn't help Joseph's cause because his master's wife took notice of him and she asked him to sleep with her. And Joseph refused, yet she tricked him and she grabbed his cloak and then she lied saying that he had actually come after her. And so we see in Genesis 39, it says, when his master heard the story, his wife told him saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. It's pretty fair, right, to say that Joseph was treated unjustly yet again, thrown into a prison for something he didn't do and left there to wait. Unsure of what was going to happen next, forgotten. And so he enters this very painful season of waiting. How hard is it to stay put in the seasons of waiting? Every instinct in our being, we want to control. We want to make a move. We want to say, this is my moment to do something. We struggle so much to see the purpose in the waiting. Louis Giglio says this, that to us, waiting is wasted. To God, waiting is working. We all have prison moments. We all have seasons of waiting and seasons of uncertainty, and God may be telling us to surrender, to stay faithful. And what we view as a waste, God is working, and the problem is we don't often stay put long enough to notice it. I've been in a season the past few months where I'm waiting. I'm waiting on God. I'm talking to him about something very specific, and I feel like he's telling me to wait, and guess what? I don't love that answer. The gift, though, that I've learned that we start to receive in the process of waiting? It's the presence of who we wait with. I've had waiting moments in my life, even silly ones, such as when I sit in a waiting room with my sick kid, or when I've been in labor rooms sitting and waiting with my husband. And I don't like the waiting, but there can be great significance in the who we wait with. What if the entire point of our waiting is so that we would recognize the presence of God? That we would draw near to him, and instead of making a move that we might think would be easier or way out, to leave that marriage, to quit that job without knowing what's next, to not be patient, fill in the blank. Instead, we say, no, we're going to stay put. And we're going to dig our heels in. Because when I dig my heels in and when I stay put, I'm staying put with God. Genesis 39, it says, while Joseph was there in prison, look again, we see it, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And so the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. We have this other moment, right, of noticing that there is something about Joseph. Like there is something going on within him. Do you start to see the pattern that God works when we stay put and we stay faithful? That in prison, Joseph, he goes on. He interprets these dreams for some of Pharaoh's staff, okay? Dreams all through Joseph's life. And there's a cupbearer and a baker, and the dreams that he interpreted were correct. And he told the cupbearer, he said, now when you go back and get out of prison and go back into the palace, will you please mention my name? Will you say my name to them? And he left, and the cupbearer forgot him. After this interaction, Joseph was in prison for 2 more full years. He was in prison for several years prior to this waiting. But then 2 full years passes, and then Pharaoh has a dream. He actually has 2 dreams. And so the next morning, he goes to seek someone who can tell him and make sense of his dreams. And no one could. But then the chief cupbearer, he has this little, he has this moment. He goes, oh my, I know. There was a Hebrew slave when I was in prison, and he interpreted my dreams and the baker's dreams, and what he said is exactly what happened, and so you should go talk to him. And so sure enough, Joseph is summoned, and he comes and he stands before Pharaoh, and he interprets his dreams exactly as they would turn out. He says there's going to be 7 years of abundance throughout the land of Egypt, 7 years of prosperity, but then those 7 years would be followed by 7 years of famine. A severe famine will come. And so Joseph warned Pharaoh to have a plan in place so that Egypt would survive the famine, that during those 7 years of abundance, to work and to store up food and to prepare for the famine. And Pharaoh goes, well, this sounds like an amazing plan, but I need someone for the job to lead the way and do this. And so in Genesis 41, we see what happens. It says, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. These dreams worked out better than the first time, right? Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh, it says, took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. Thus, he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Joseph went from the pit to the prison to the palace. He now had so much authority and so much power. He had success, he had influence, but it was years upon years. It was about 23 years that had passed since he was thrown into a pit of suffering, of waiting, of accepting his reality and just choosing day by day by day to stay faithful. And now he's finally in the palace and he's reached the top. He gets the job. He gets married, he gets a wife. Oftentimes, we find ourselves in these similar moments, these what I call like mountaintop moments. Times where everything seems to be working in our favor. We got the promotion, we met the girl or guy, we finally hit that milestone and we go, all right, it's time for me to make my big move. We kind of think we're a big deal. And so why not do something now? And you know what Joseph did when he reached the top? Even then, he just stayed put. He just dug his heels in and he stayed humble. Our egos love to get the best of us in these moments, don't they? Yet Joseph put his head down and he was faithful, and the 7 years of abundance came, and what did he do? He just worked faithfully, storing up more than they would need, packing the storehouses with grain and food. And during this time, I love this little detail that it says, before the 7 years of famine, Joseph had 2 sons. And look at this. It says in Genesis 41, Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Joseph hadn't forgotten what season he went through. But he had come to terms, hadn't he? He had accepted what this season have formed him into, and he was finally experiencing the fruit that does come from suffering. Something was going on in Joseph all of these years. There was this deep well that had been forged through the pain, through the suffering, through the faithfulness, through the obedience. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this, that one act of obedience is better than 100 sermons. Someday, it is just one simple act of staying put. One act of obedience, of not running, not chasing the next season. And that's what we see in the life of Joseph, moment after moment of acceptance, of surrender, of faithfulness, staying put. It doesn't mean passive. Instead, it's a posture we have It's a view where we're able to see the significance of what is right in front of us, despite how much we like it or not. You may hear all of this and you think, well, that's so great for Joseph. I mean, he had a powerful job. He finally got the wife, the kids. He went through a lot of suffering, but he got his fairy tale little Disney happy ending. But was that it? Is that all that's at stake if we don't stay put and if we don't stay faithful? What I find so significant, and this comes at the end of the story and just deeply moving about the life of Joseph, it's kind of a hard pill for you and I to swallow. And it's that maybe God wants to do something through you and I that doesn't even in the end benefit you and I. That maybe God wants us to stay put for the sake of others, for our family, for your children, for those around you, for the generations to come. We read in Genesis 41 that all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. That the famine, it was widespread, it was everywhere. And so full circle, wild story. Joseph's father, now in his older age, he gets word of this and he tells his now grown sons, he says, you guys need to go to Egypt and buy grain for our family as the famine has come to us. And so they go to Egypt, and I kid you not, they stand before none other than Joseph himself. They don't recognize him. And they don't even stand. Guess what they do? They bow down on their knees in front of Joseph, just as he said they would 20 years ago. And you just have to read the story. After a couple trips back and forth, his brother's still not recognizing who he is. Joseph has this moment and he decides he's going to reveal himself to his brothers. And I want you to know the posture of Joseph in this moment, because he has been in a pit and he has been in a prison because of what his brothers did to him. And now they're asking him for food. They're coming to him, not just so they can plant some new crop. I mean, this is life or death. This is for generations upon generations to be saved. And Joseph, think about it, he has so much control over them. And so he tells everyone in the palace to leave so that he can have this moment with his brothers. And in Genesis 45, it says this right here. It said, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him. It's like a wail, right? And Pharaoh's household heard about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Can you imagine? And then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when they had done so, he said, I'm your brother Joseph, the one, remember, you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by great deliverance. And then he says, so then it was not you who sent me here, but God. Don't you read that and wonder how in the world Joseph is able to say that? Forgiveness and healing are overflowing from him. Something happened deep inside him in the pit and in the prison and in the palace. And I believe it happens to us when we stay put, when we stay faithful to God, when we surrender our will to God. St. Ignatius said that for everything has the potential of calling forth in us, look at those words, a deeper response to our life in God. Our only one desire and one choice should be this, that I want and I choose what better leads to God's deepening his life in me. The problem is typically it's just that it's not easy. Through God's deepening in Joseph's life, though, look at that. Generations upon generations are saved because of his faithfulness. Redemption and restoration happened. His family comes back together, all because Joseph stayed put. You know, what God desires for us to become, that deepening work he wants to do in us, it does often come in the pit and in the prison and sometimes in those palace moments in our life. But I do wonder if sometimes God can't get to us. He can't do the deepening work that he so desires to do in us because we're running away and he's yelling, no, 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 just stay put. Just stay faithful to me. Just stay obedient. It's just one step in the right direction. I'm so moved right now by, similar stories to Joseph, the simple yet profound stories of people who they're like the Josephs of our day, right? You know, the fathers who want to leave a struggling marriage and finally say yes to counseling, they look back 15 years later and see the impact of staying put, impact it had on their kids. Those who choose to gut through a job that maybe they don't love, but what does it do? Well, it provides literal food for their family and they get to be with each other. The young adult who so wants to be in a relationship but will not settle for someone who doesn't see eye to eye on their genuine chase of Jesus that they want to do together. Just acts of staying put, acts of surrender, acts of acceptance, acts of faithfulness that really, and you talk about them, you don't think they're all that special, but in the end, man, they are everything. We do events for women called Rooted. And yeah, they're so fun. We should do another one soon, don't you think? They're amazing nights. We gather women and we usually theme them. And usually I just figure out what a burden is that God has laid upon my heart. And we had one where it really came out of a song I listened to that you're going to hear in a couple moments. But it was a night where we focused on celebrating God's faithfulness and the joy that it is to follow Jesus. And it was such a powerful night, and not because of anything I said or did, but because there were 4 brave women who said yes to me begging them to share their journeys and their stories. And they really are stories of being in a pit, in a prison, in a palace. And they were so profound, and not because of anything more than that they said yes to following Jesus before they really knew what that meant. And before they knew what cards they were going to get dealt. And there are stories that it just feels unfair to not share with everybody. And so we, the men are here today and we're going to let you in on these. And so I asked and I pleaded Abby and Laura to share, who exemplify seasons of just staying put so beautifully. And so you're going to hear from them. Here are their stories.
Good morning. My name is Abby Cavalancia, and my life has been a beautiful, messy, and grace-filled experience that I feel so grateful to stand here today and share it with all of you. When I was a little girl, I was always concerned about the future and what it would hold for me. I was a pretty existential kid, always sitting with the grown-ups, an old soul, 4 going on 14, the mom of my friend group, too bossy, talks too much, basically all of the things that a firstborn daughter is blessed with. And in the first month of 5th grade, my dad, who had otherwise been a healthy and active man, was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic lung cancer. That was in September of 2006. They gave him roughly 6 months to live. I was 10 years old, and according to a diagnosis, my dad would likely be gone by St. Patrick's Day. But then he wasn't. The next 2 years were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, chemotherapy, hospital stays, memories made, and the future I had my sights on was grieved. When my dad died in October of 2008, outliving multiple prognoses, my family, now of 3, stepped into a very different reality. In my freshman year of high school, right around this time of year, actually, I started attending this church. I was 14 years old, and I've been a part of this church now for a little more than half of my life. And I now get the opportunity to help lead a ministry at this church full of students looking for God, just like I was almost 15 years ago. And I am beyond grateful that God has used me in all of my brokenness to help share the gift that is following Jesus with them and also with this congregation. The part of my story that I never could have predicted was that I would be standing up here today, having been married for almost 7 years with no children. I am a planner, just one of those things about being a firstborn daughter, and this was definitely not my plan. One of the only things I've ever been sure of in life is that I knew I wanted to be a mom. When I would think about what I wanted to be when I grew up, the answer that I never had to think about was always mom. And in November of 2020, I found out that I was pregnant. The overwhelming sense of joy and honestly just a very large feeling of being overwhelmed hit me like a ton of bricks. I was going to be a mom. Now, unfortunately, not long after finding out I was pregnant, I was back to square one with no baby on the way. It's normal, you're only 24, was the only reassurance my doctor offered. And aside from 2 of my closest friends, we hadn't told anyone that I was pregnant when it happened. So telling our parents and friends that I was pregnant but wasn't anymore was horrible. It was actually kind of awkward. And it felt really surreal to share. And I felt a huge amount of shame, like I had done something to cause it. 10 months later, I found out I was pregnant again, and it truly felt like all of the pain had been worth it. We told our immediate family and some close friends right away. We had decided we were not going to let what had happened before prevent us from being excited for what was to come. But I would be lying if I said I was not holding my breath the whole time. A few weeks later, the day before my first ultrasound, I wound up in the ER after church on a Sunday. And by the following Friday, after multiple ultrasounds, blood draws, and tests, I was back at square one. No baby, and an overwhelming amount of questions. As time went on with no positive tests, I sought additional care from a fertility specialist. When I went to our first appointment, I knew that the word I had been long avoiding was looming: infertility. And the hardest part for me was the word that my doctor put in front of it: unexplained. The amount of testing, procedures, medications, and tracking I had done over the course of the next 2 years was nauseating. Every time I went back to the doctor, it was the same result as before: there's nothing wrong, everything is normal, followed by the sentences, "You're so young, you have plenty of time." Well, now it's been almost 5 years since this part of my story began, and it's been the farthest thing from easy. I have experienced joy like I never have, and also held grief for something so small that I didn't know was possible. And it would be really awesome if I was able to get up here today and tell you that something is different now, that I am pregnant, or that the reasons for my infertility were finally figured out, or even that I'm actively taking steps right now to pursue more fertility treatment or seeking more insight from yet another specialist, but that is not what I'm able to say today. What I am able to say is that in the difficulties of my life, including this one, the ones that I have had no control over, and the ones that have been my own making, the ones that I've shared, and the ones that I have not, that Jesus has never left my side. As I have walked through the darkest valleys of my life, he has never left me. He has been my rock and my comforter, and he is the one I have cried out to. He has shown me that I embody a mother in so many ways, more than just biology. And he's given me the opportunity to love and lead the next generation through my work and my life, and to help them start to grasp just how deeply their Father loves them. I would still love to have children one day, if that is what God has in store. But for a very long time, I believed that having my own child was the gift I needed to experience the life God had for me. But there is so much more, and he is still good, and he is still faithful. And the joy I have found in following Jesus is so much greater than I could have imagined. And what a gift it is to be able to bear his name.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Began, and I'm very humbled to be here this morning. to tell my story. Born and raised in Lima, Ohio, a very normal upbringing. Mother, father, active grandparents, 3 sisters and a brother. Introduced to my first husband by our mothers. Match made in heaven, the good old blind date. Married in 1988, moved to Columbus, Ohio, had 2 sons, one in 1992 and our second in 1995. Worked hard, raising a family, saving for a house. Things were on a good path. 2000 came a devastating cancer diagnosis for my first husband, Brian. Surgery, hospital stays, doctor's appointments, treatment, school, sporting activities. Not sure how I was handling it all. Things were hard, but looking back, God was carrying us. 2004, my husband passed. We were now a family of 3. My children were 12 and 10. I was 43. Once again, we were doing hard. Thanking God for family and friends I call angels on earth. Juggling life without my husband was unbearable at times. He was so full of love and wisdom, and the empty chair at the dinner table made for very quiet evenings. We prayed for healing, as it was so hard to comprehend that Daddy wasn't ever going to be joining us again. I remember being in Dick's Sporting Goods, buying football cleats, and seeing several young men with their dads. Realizing this was my new norm, I just sat on the bench and tried to hide my tears. A friend asked me how I was getting through all of this, and I had stated that I had surrendered the white flag a long time ago. I had to give everything up to Jesus. Unfortunately, the wonderful neighbors across the street were going through a cancer diagnosis as well. Janet had battled breast cancer for 5 years and lost her battle in 2009. The scab was ripped off once again as we were all heartbroken to lose our dear friend. I was certainly empathetic and tried to offer as much support as possible. Catherine was in her first year of college, and Mary was just 13. Rob and I had many discussions about grief, changing beneficiaries, paperwork, and more paperwork. The one thing he says changed everything is when I asked him to go to a long-term care seminar. I had promised myself that I wasn't going to date until Griffin had graduated high school. 2013 came around and he had graduated, and I was being prompted by the girls at work to get out there and start dating. Keep in mind, my last date had been almost 30 years ago. I replied that I wasn't going to go online dating or meet anybody in a bar, and their reply was, "What about the guy across the street?" I was terrified to lose a close friendship if things went in the wrong direction. I'm happy to say that Rob and I will be celebrating our 9th year anniversary this May. When Carmen reached out and asked me about sharing my story, I felt God working on my heart. Maybe this is the reason he put me in this particular journey, hopefully to inspire someone here this morning. You come to a realization that everyone has or will go through hardships, divorce, finance, loss. There's no escaping. The only way to do hard is with Jesus. What a joy it is to follow Jesus. I have seen beauty from ashes. I have experienced the faithfulness of God. Thank you.